This week on Dig Me Out. With your hosts, Jason Zia and Tim Minichi.
Jay, we're back again with another episode thanks to our Dig Me Out Union on Patreon. You can help us make the next episode happen by joining us at dmounion.com or digmeoutunion.com. Jay is joining us from the
other side.
The other side. It's very, the screen is very white.
For people not on video, my background is very white today. So I have an angelic glow behind me.
It's like mayonnaise has been spread across the lens.
That's gross. Okay.
Yeah. What's not gross? I'm
going to be honest. It'd be gross and a little bit delicious.
Yeah. If it's a tangy mayo, some mayos are bland, but when you get a little tang in your mayo,
a little lemon in there.
Yes. Little paprika. Spice it up. That paprika. We're going to do a poll episode, folks. This is our August poll for 2023. It's where you go to digmeoutpodcast.com, you put an album in the hopper, and then it comes out of the hopper via the poll or via this tournament, and then it gets narrowed down from many to one. Many albums enter, one album leaves. And there were 18 albums in this poll, 2 rounds of 9, I believe, for August.
Yep.
So let's talk about what got submitted in round 1 of our August poll tournament. Widow's Walk by the Forbidden Dimension by Richard Waterman. Developer by Silkworm, suggested by Willie Dillon. Leisure Noise by Gay Dad, suggested by Bill Davidson. Recipe for Hate by Bad Religion, suggested by Eric Peterson. The Pace is Glacial by Seam, suggested by Dominic DeVito. Lions and Tigers and Bears by The Adventures, suggested by Keith Badge. Speed is Dreaming by St. Johnny, suggested by Jonathan Lee. Number 2 by Black Heart Procession, suggested by Vadim Taver. And Metasexual by Joy Drop, suggested by Mike Bankhead. And I believe in this one, our 2 winners were Joy Drop and Gay Dad, which I did not see that coming. I thought for sure Silkworm, because a lot of people have talked about Silkworm over the years, that we should talk about Silkworm, that we should be including them in the discussion. And we've never really talked about Silkworm, and they only got 3% of the vote. They got the least amount. Maybe it was this album. Maybe we got the wrong album in there from our hopper. But it was Joy Drop, Metasexual, Gay Dad, Leisure Noise. I have not listened to Joy Drop, but I do remember Gay Dad. There was like a buzz about that band when they came out, them and Menswear and like these second tier Britpop bands that were coming out in the 90s. I believe that's who it was, or I'm mixing them up with another band. I don't remember. It's been a long time. Second poll, Jay. Second poll. Second time. 2 of the bands had albums in this one as well. Bad Religion, Stranger Than Fiction, suggested by Eric Peterson, and Libertine by Silkworm, suggested by Willie Dillon. So we've got 2 Silkworms and 2 Bad Religions.
Yeah.
It could have been a Silkworm, Bad Religion final, but that's not how it's shaken out.
Tag team.
The other picks were Blow by Straight Jacket Fitz, suggested by Richard Waterman. Black Music by Chocolate Genius, suggested by Bill Davidson. The Self-Titled by Cause and Effect, suggested by Lars Lindbad. Let Me Come Over by Buffalo Tom, suggested by Kevin. Griefus, Gronks, and Sheet by Love Cup, suggested by Franklin. Pacer by the Amps, the Kim Deal side project, suggested by Andrew McGinnis. And Mods Carve the Pig, Assassins, Toads, and God's Flesh by Thought Industry, suggested by Mick Nuggets. And his comment was, album title says it all. I don't know what the album title says.
Yeah.
I don't know what that
There are a couple tongue twisters in there.
Yeah, that is
a lot of words going on.
Too many words. Out of that, our winners, Bad Religion and Buffalo Tom. So you're going into the final. You got Bad Religion, Stranger Than Fiction. Buffalo Tom, Let Me Come Over. Joy Drop, Metasexual. Gay Dad, Leisure Noise. What was at the top of the charts this week?
I can hear you slipping into that.
It just sort of happened.
You're gonna start talking about a dead dog.
I got a letter from little Bobby Jones in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And he writes, my dog died while I was listening to Buffalo Tom. Would you play Buffalo Tom? I listened religiously to Casey Kasem's top 40 countdown when I was a kid. Religious. I never missed it. It was one of the most important things. I absolutely, I would tape it and listen to it over. Like I
still have those tapes?
No.
They probably replay those somewhere.
Well, they do. Right? Yeah.
Okay.
There's radio stations that just play them every weekend, like based on like God. It's like the one from like 50 years ago. They play it this weekend to match the dates, that kind of thing.
There you go.
Yeah, that's it. It's not just TV that's syndicated, folks. Radio is also syndicated. As if you're aware of talk radio, you also that's been syndicated for a long time. So, out of these four, coming in last was Joy Drop's Metasexual. Coming in second last or third was Leisure Noise by Gay Dad. And then I thought this was going to be a little bit closer, but it ended up being a pull away for Bad Religion. They ended up winning 43% over 31% over Buffalo Tom. So for the first time in 13 years, we're going to be talking about Bad Religion on this show. We covered them on the pop punk in the 90s episode, sort of, briefly, but we haven't dedicated a full album. So have you ever listened to Bad Religion, like really dug into them at all, or have you just kind of it's been cursory? I know you've heard of them. It's not.
Yeah, no, this, so they were a band that I had heard the name, and then this record came out. It got heavy radio airplay, at least in Cleveland. And I was a little taken back. Like I knew they were a punk band, but we'll get into the review, but I mean, it's pretty melodic and it has a lot of hard rock flavor to it. So I was intrigued. It was one of those bands that would come on the radio and, I would always listen to it. I wouldn't change the dial. So I enjoyed them from that. I didn't dive into the catalog. I didn't get the records, but they were a band I liked. I liked the sound, at least from this record when I heard it at the time, and sort of changed my perspective on maybe what they were and what they were about based on it.
So
did you know them?
A little bit. I actually have MP3s that I probably got off of LimeWire 20 years ago for like the first, I want to say like 10 albums. I don't have anything past like 2000. So I have this record, and I had listened to them at some point. Like I had gone through and checked out all the albums years ago, but I never really spent a lot of time with the band. I know more about them just by reading other things about like other bands and just because they're so important to like the whole California, LA punk rock scene, that they just kind of come up in the discussion constantly. So a little bit of history. I didn't realize that they had been around so long. They formed in 1980. And it was the original lineup was, it's like the founding members is Greg Graffin, vocalist, along with Jay Bentley and Brett Gurewitz. Brian Baker, who's been in a number of bands, has been a member of the group since '94. So he came in right around this record. They've also had recently Mike Dimkich has been the guitarist, and Jamie Miller has been the drummer for the band. But they've gone through a lot of not rhythm section, but second guitar and drummers.
Yeah.
They also have broken up. So they actually they were together from 80 to 83, and they put out their first album in 81 called How Could Hell Be Any Worse? That's when their first drummer quit. And it sold about 12,000 copies on Epitaph, which was the label that Brett Gurewitz started. That's Brett Gurewitz of this band he owns Epitaph Records. So they break up, and they end up I think they broke up around 80, like in 83, and then got back together. But then they put out a progressive rock album called Into the Unknown, which is driven by keyboards and is like slow, and it doesn't sound anything like the band. It was like very off kilter compared to what they were doing. After that, they're pretty much consistently putting out records and touring constantly. They did have a little bit of a break from 83 to 87. And then in 88, they put out Suffer. And then pretty much every year they're putting out records. 89, No Control. Against the Grain in 90, Generator in 92, Recipe for Hate in 93. And I feel like that's where I first heard of the band, was in 93. Because like that's when the pop punk scene sort of started bubbling up in California to like a national level.
Yeah.
And then that was their last record on Epitaph. They decided, even though the Brett Gurewitz owned Epitaph, they were like, hey, Atlantic's offering a ton of money. Let's go to Atlantic and see what we can do with all this Atlantic money. So this album, Stranger Than Fiction, was their first one on Atlantic Records. Although Epitaph got to do the reissue when they did that. It made it to number 87 on the Billboard 200. This was followed by The Gray Race, also on Atlantic in 1997. That one was produced by Rick Ocasek. And then followed the following year, Atlantic, No Substance on Atlantic in 98. 2000, they released The New America, which was produced by Todd Rundgren.
Man, wow. Okay.
Yeah.
I had no idea they were this adventurous with producers.
Then they went back to Epitaph and they self-produced The Process of Belief for 2002. They put out The Empire Strikes First in 2004, again self-produced. Epitaph, New Maps of Hell in 2007. Joe Barresi produced that one. He's worked with like Jesus Lizard and Pennywise and Caius and Melvin, so in that wheelhouse. And that came out in July of 2007. Put out a live album. The Descent of Man came out in 2010, again produced by Joe Barresi. True North in 2013, again with Joe Barresi on Epitaph. They did a Christmas songs album in 2013. Well, EP. It's an EP because the songs are so short. It's 9 songs and it's 19 minutes. Age of Unreason is their last record. That one came out on Epitaph in 2019. It was produced by Carlos de la Garza, who has worked with Jimmy Eat World, Tegan and Sarah, Paramore, Charlie Bliss, Fits in the Tantrums. So definitely like, a different sound. And I don't know if they're working on anything now, but they've been pretty consistent in terms of putting stuff out. So I would not be surprised if they're not like they're together now and all that kind of stuff. about this record specifically, there were 4 singles released. And the first one, 21st Century Digital Boy, is actually a re-recording of the song that originally appeared on Against the Grain, which came out in 1990. But so they recorded it for the album, and then they went and toured, and Brett Gurewitz was like, "We're playing it better on tour than we did on record. I really want to re-record that song, because it doesn't sound like what we're doing now." And Greg Graffin said, "We're a very democratic band. We have 5 members. If 3 of the members vote for something, then that happens. Like that, we respect the democracy, unless somebody is like throwing a fit and like absolutely doesn't want to do something." But he's like, we were all cool with it because Brett wrote the song, and he was like, "I feel like this is a good chance for a single. And since we're going to Atlantic, we didn't record it right the first time. Let's try to get it right." And he was right. It actually did end up like doing okay for them. It made it to number 11 on the US alternative airplay chart for Billboard. But what's interesting, well, we'll get into the context of the song later, but it ended up being, when they did release the re-release single, Andy Wallace, the producer, did the re-release, reissue or produced it for him, and also worked on the record. They also released Infected, Stranger Than Fiction, and Incomplete as the singles. All of the songs, it's almost every other song, is either written by Brett Gurewitz or Greg Graffin. Track 8, Television, was co-written by Brett Gurewitz with Jeanette Neapolitano from Concrete Blonde.
Oh, okay.
It features Tim Armstrong from Rancid singing on that song. And then there are, of course, European and Japanese versions that have more songs on them. There's actually 18 total songs if you get the Japanese version. There are a few other people, like Jim Lindberg of Pennywise does backing vocals on Marked. Wayne Kramer of the MC5 plays lead guitar on the first track, Incomplete. So they use that Atlantic money to fly some friends in and be like, "Hey, we'll put you up at a hotel." And sure. I don't know, but that sounds like what they did. I mean, that's pretty cool that they were able to get some interesting folks in to write with and to play on the record. Like I said, Epitaph reissued it. They actually put out a remastered reissue in 2018. So the band basically has the record back from Atlantic, I guess. So a couple comments from our patrons. Matt Stopp said, "Still riding the Bad Religion wave," because he voted for it in the first poll. "Catchy, almost post-grungy with tons of hits. Their peak." Jeremy Menn said, "Those first 2 Atlantic albums with all the guest stars was my faves. I probably go back to Recipe for Hate more often, but that's because I burn myself out on Stranger Than Fiction. Probably their best album from beginning to end." Excuse me. Terry McCook said, "I know that era of Bad Religion is controversial. That's exactly why Stranger Than Fiction is a great record to discuss. Lots of backstory and lots of great music. It was my gateway to their whole catalog through Infected and 21st Century Digital Boy. And no one in alternative rock punk understands melody and harmony better than Greg Graffin." And Matt's original comment was, "I love Thought Industry, but Stranger Than Fiction rocks in a different way than a lot of their other releases. It's hella catchy and seemed to fit right in with the post-grunge sound that was making its way in the mainstream. I think that's what made so many of those songs FM rock staples in the 90s. I love this record." As we mentioned, this was 94 that this came out. And I believe, which is the same year as Dookie. So this was like the year of pop punk exploding, because that came out in February of 94. This album came out in August of 94. I'm trying to remember when the Offspring's album came out. I want to say it was either the year before or this year with let's see. Yeah, Smash comes out in 94, which has come out and play.
Oh, wow. Yep.
It's Self-Esteem. So I mean, you have one of the biggest albums in terms of smash, in terms of singles and stuff like that. You have Green Day, which is again one of the biggest albums of the decade. So I don't know that there's any bigger year for pop punk in the 90s than this year. Let's get into this record, Jay. Let's talk about Stranger Than Fiction by Bad Religion. Tell me something you liked about this record.
It's the vocals are the star here. I think it's this really dynamic integration of melody and intensity. So you've got, I think, a voice delivery that is unique, distinctive. He's got a great tone. He's got a little grit in there. You know, he can bark a little bit and really, you know, put some weight behind it, but he can deliver a melody, which I think is super effective. And he's got a really strong sense of how to write. You know, these songs are very accessible from a vocal standpoint. You know, they're very easy to like grab onto. You kind of feel familiar, but when you really listen to them, especially the lyrics, you don't always know where they're going, or they're certainly not cliched in any way. So it's this really interesting juxtaposition of this punk intensity and attitude and energy with a vocal that is really forward, easy to grab onto and identify with. You know, in this package that's kind of unlike anything else. I mean, even those bands you were talking about at the time, like, you know, I don't think they sound like this. There's a little bit more of a hard rock edge to the production. There's a bit more care in like how the vocals are produced. So you get a punchy lead vocal. There's a lot of really cool background vocals on this album and cool harmonies. So it's really deceptive. Like the songs start off and you're like, oh, okay, this is a punk song. And honestly, musically, a lot of times, if you took the vocal out, it could be anybody. Like fairly nondescript. You know, it's big production, sounds huge, sounds great, but not always any, you know, musically anything going on here that's incredibly distinct. But as soon as you hear the first couple notes of the vocal, right, you know it's them, and you can grab onto it and you sort of know where it's going. It's very accessible, it's pretty hooky. So I think it's this really cool combination of those two things. And yeah, often I found myself really intrigued with like kind of the hard rock roots of this, like what bands, you know, are kind of creeping through here, to give it that sound. Like, what are the touchstones outside of punk that are kind of making this up, which was interesting. Like there were little certain parts I was like, oh, that kind of looks like that sounds like an old school Scorpion song or something, the way that riff is done. And, you know, so that was kind of fun. I think the last thing that really makes it, I think, distinct from the bands that you talked about, and maybe a little bit unique in the punk space, is that lyrically, I really enjoyed it because it felt more like these were like the touchstone for me was like, oh, these are kind of like more protest folk songs than they are like punk songs. They're more about like we, us, society, themes like that versus me, right? There's like there's not self-loathing here. There's not like, which you hear in that first Green Day record, you know, it's a lot about like what I'm doing, what my life is like, my angst, my anger, me. I mean, you even hear that in like Blink-182 and, you know, a lot of these bands. And this, I don't know, when I listen to this isn't about him or anyone. It's not about the writer. It's more about like observations about society and bigger topics. It's more about us, which I thought was pretty cool. Like it has this anthemic almost at times feel to it, which again, you wouldn't expect if you just listen to the music. I think the handshake is a good example of that.
Mm-hmm.
20th Century Digital Boy is another good example of that. You're like, damn, this is an anthem song. It's pretty epic.
I can't explain it. The things you're saying to me. It's going yeah, 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 yeah. Oh yeah. 'Cause I'm a 21st century digital boy. I don't know how to read, but I got a lot of toys. My daddy's a lazy middle class intellectual. My mommy's on Valium, so ineffectual. A life of mystery. I'm trying to tell you about no control, but now I really don't know. And then you told me how bad you had to suffer. Is that really all you had to offer?
So that's some of the stuff that I like. It's a pretty distinctive combination. And even though on paper the pieces are all very well understood and established, something about the way they put it together can only be them, which I think is pretty cool. What worked for you?
Well, you mentioned it. Greg Graffin's vocal and lyrics are really interesting. If you take that out of the equation, there's a lot of this, which is fairly straightforward musically. It's stuff we've heard before. But when you layer him and the backing vocals, I mean, they're doing like 3-part harmonies in some of these songs
Yeah,
with regards to adding. It's really cool to hear that. But his wit as a songwriter and as a lyricist really comes through. I'm glad you mentioned the handshake, because it's basically it's an attack on handshakes as this like corporate sort of faceless, even though you're face to face, this sort of soulless interaction between people. The chorus goes, this is the way of the modern world. Everyone's vying for patronage. This is the way of the modern world, and something's got to give. And then the outro is fend for yourself, and shun the handshake. I believe in unity, and I will. And it keeps repeating, fend for yourself, shun the handshake, and I am willing to compromise. I believe in unity. I'm not going to lie or sell my soul. Something's got to give. I just like the idea of like taking that image of like two guys in business suits, and it's this contract. It's not about like connecting, even though you're touching hands. It's just about this business contract that's happening between people. And him saying, every time you shake someone's hand and it feels like your best friend, could it be that it's only superficiality without regard to well-being, without an inkling of compromise? Handshakes are nothing but a subtle fuck you, and contracts determine the best friendships. Like it's not something you would hear like in a Offspring or a Green Day song.
Right.
It's much headier than that. And I definitely appreciated him taking this really it's like it's almost like a postgraduate course of pop punk. You know what I mean?
But it's
like,
still super accessible though.
Yeah,
Like when you read
so
those lyrics,
catchy.
you're like, man, that's so clumsy. But when you hear him sing it, you're like, oh, that's not clumsy at all. Like,
oh yeah, I mean, in Inner Logic, it opens with automatons with business suits swinging black boxes, sequestering the blueprints of daily life. that does not roll off the tongue when you say it, but somehow when he sings it, it makes sense. And that's not I mean, there's lyrics all over the place like that, where it's just like you read it and you go, that can't possibly make sense. I had to look up because on the title track, Stranger Than Fiction, he uses the word febrile.
Yeah.
I didn't know what the heck that meant.
I didn't know either. I was like, is that a typo?
It can mean different things. It can mean feverish, or showing symptoms of a fever, or like nervous energy. So a febrile, shocking, violent smack, and the children are hopping for a heart attack. Tonight the windows are watching, the streets all conspire, and the lamppost can't stop crying. I mean, this is like beat poetry stuff in
Yeah.
you know, it's, and again, we're talking about pop melodies over punk music, which is pretty amazing.
A feeble shock, skin violence back, and the children are hoping for a heart attack. Tonight the windows are watching, the streets all conspire, and the lamppost can't stop crying. If I could fly high above the world, would see much living us, filled with stupidity. Oh, and I'd see hammer on a homicide, brother, suicide, and oxygen freeze who pick his hide and hide. The one who's scratching at my door. My morning paper's got the scores, the human interest stories, and the obituary. Oh yeah, cockroach naps, rattling traps. How many devils can you fit upon a match? And curiosity kills the Kerouac cat. Sometimes truth is stranger than fiction. In my alley round the
And I will admit, like, I didn't always, when I've listened to Greg Graffin and Bad Religion, I don't always connect with it because he's so rapid fire and it's so dense at times, which I obviously have experience with dense music, having listened to the Manic Street Preachers a number of times. But it really takes time to, I think this was a good process because I did have to like listen to it over and over again. I couldn't just like listen to one album, move on to the next one. Okay, I heard that. All right, what's this? I kind of had to just keep playing it over and over again. And then the hooks drill into you, and the melodies that are really catchy drill into you. And then you start paying attention to the lyrics. And it sort of clicks at that point. But like the chorus of Stranger Than Fiction is cockroach naps, rattling traps. How many devils can you fit upon a match head? Curiosity killed the Kerouac cat. Sometimes truth is stranger than fiction.
Yeah, that's a pretty hooky song too. That's one of the singles, right?
I don't even know that curiosity is a word. I'll Google that, but like that just seems made up. Curiosity. Apparently
This is
it's caring plus curiosity. I don't know what that, but okay.
Okay. This is a pretty fun listen with the in Apple Music. You can turn the lyrics on and they animate. It's
right.
Usually that's a little underwhelming, but for this record, it was like as dynamic watching that as the music. Like just, you know what I mean? The punctuation and the word choices and everything. It was like just like very. It was like a whole other layer or way to experience the record that really worked well. It's kind of fun.
So what's interesting is that it's being sung by Greg Graffin, but it was written by Brett Gurewitz. So he had to, make that happen.
Yeah.
In terms of and he on the I did a Google search on that word and it comes up the Bad Religion message board from 2004. Brett Gurewitz actually explained it. He said, curiosity is caring plus curiosity in the strong stranger than fiction. I talk about a few writers who were plagued with delusionment despite or perhaps because of their brilliance. As the saying goes, curiosity killed the cat, and caring too much may have been a condition of Kerouac's. And so curiosity killed the Kerouac cat. One of my favorite writers, by the way. I'm still confused, but that's fine. It's cool, and sometimes lyrics don't have to necessarily make perfect sense as long as they make musical sense, and they give you an interesting like flow of consonants and vowels is what I will say.
Yeah.
but good to know that there's a Bad Religion message board where they're actually answering questions about this, because I'm sure there are more than a few questions about this, because the chorus in that song, it changes each time. So that's the first chorus, and then the second chorus he mentions Wolf, which I believe is Thomas Wolfe, and Hemingway. I don't know if there's any other writers mentioned in that song or not, but anyway, I also this sounds pretty good as far as a record goes.
Oh yeah, definitely.
I know it's been remastered and reissued and whatnot, but sometimes with punk rock records that have aged, they haven't aged well in the musical department, just in terms of production, like whether it's especially hurts the drums, but the guitars can sound tinny and small, and they don't necessarily, not everything was recorded with the best gear sometimes or under the best circumstances. But this being Atlantic record, produced by Andy, or co-produced by Andy Wallace, seems like they knew what they were doing. I mean, this is 14 years into the band's existence too. They kind of probably had an idea of how to get in the studio and work by the time they're making their 8th record. So
yeah, and Andy Wallace produced it. He's done a lot of big records as a producer or a mixer, so the tones are there. The deluxe version on Apple Music has been remastered for Dolby Atmos. It sounded big. It sounded really good.
Now, this did get hate when it came out because of the fact that they signed to Atlantic, so it was considered a sellout record, which I think is funny, because there's nothing about this that makes me think, oh, this band sold out. Like this,
yeah,
he's going after so many different targets and topics. I don't know what they would have been expecting for it to. I don't know. I
mean, I guess if you call like, a big budget and spending money on recording, then a sellout, then I suppose. But yeah, it feels uncompromised lyrically.
I mean, if anything, like the money helped in terms of giving them access to, a top-notch producer to work with and honing these songs. I mean, this is a 15-song record, and it still comes in at 38 minutes. That's an average of like 2.5 minutes a song. I think there's one song over 3 minutes. Yeah,
these are sharp. These are sharp. The song rating, I didn't mention that, but it's pretty sophisticated stuff. There's some pre-choruses on this album too.
Mm-hmm.
Inner Logic is one example. That harmony that comes in, it's like, what? Like, where did that come from? I think it's Infected. The pre-chorus for that is really cool too. There's some, they're not just like, it's deceptive. Look, some of these songs start and you're like, okay, it's gonna be verse, chorus, verse, and we're done. But they throw these curves in, like these pre-choruses and these little dynamics or these layered vocals. You're like, okay, this is different. Like there's a little bit more sophistication going on here.
Now here I go, hope I don't break down. I won't take anything, I don't need anything. Don't want to exist, I can't persist. Please stop before I do it again. Just talk about nothing, let's talk about nothing. Let's talk about no one, please talk about no one. Someone, anyone. You and me have a disease. You affect me, you infect me. I'm afflicted, you're addicted. You and me.
I'm glad you mentioned Infected, because in terms of what doesn't work, that's a song that does work for me, because they slow the tempo down a little bit. There's some dynamics in that song. Like when they get to that pre-chorus part, when he's like, let's talk about nothing, and there's like a stop.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
There's that descending, like like that riff is really cool. when they are in prototype punk mode and it's boom, 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 the music matters less to me.
Yep.
And I don't find myself as interested in revisiting those songs as I am like 21st Century Boy or Infected or some of the other songs on the record that are less in the straight up punk end of things and move a little bit more into like pop punk or I don't know, skate punk. I don't know whatever different punk subgenres you want to throw out there.
Yeah, it's I'm with you. It's I have the same take on like what didn't work. To me, it really just comes down to probably the drumming. Great. It sounds like a great drummer, but I think the songs that you're calling out and the ones that I'm thinking of too, they're just using the same punk beat. You know, it's boom into the punk beat, 2 minutes of the punk beat on the next song into the same beat again. So when you get to those songs that slow down, they're a little bit more driving. Like Infected is a good example. Even like Television has some variations. Inner Logic, 20th Century Boy, like I think it's Slumber is a little bit more mid-tempo. Like they're absolutely critical for this record, and I would take a few more of them. And even if it just meant like, hey dude, pick a different beat. Like you can play intense, but just find another way to do it. Some of those are fine. Like I think Incomplete is a good example where it really establishes them quickly on the record. It almost has like a Motorhead vibe to it. It's like that intense musically. I don't mind a couple of those, but
right.
It's like 70% of the record. Maybe 40% of the record like that would be more preferable for me. I find myself not disliking those songs. I'm less engaged, and it just is taking me longer to really dig into like I think on those like the vocal, the hook, because it's so relentless too. You know, you're just like
right.
Boom, song starts, song stops, next one starts. It sounds exactly like the last song that stopped from a rhythm standpoint.
Yes.
And you're like, oh, so like, can we roll down the tempo for a second here, guys? Like,
right. Or if you're going to do that, do like Television, I think is an interesting case because they do that. It's almost, it almost has like a British pop punk feel or punk feel, like television. Yeah. Mm-hmm. That's really interesting. That's different. It's this gang chorusy kind of thing going on. You got, you know, Tim Armstrong from Rancid showing up. That's a good change of pace without really changing what you do. And I agree with you. You know, there are spots where, was it like the handshake is still up tempo, but it's not the boom ching boom ching boom ching boom ching, like it's just slow enough that they can get away from that, but they can still be up tempo. I don't need them to be so slow that it's just a rock song.
It has just enough flavor to it that like, oh, that's a distinct sounding drum part. Even though it's not tremendously different, like the feel's a little different than dynamics. So even Television, there's some like sometimes like the guitars are offset and they kind of do these counters and stuff that help a lot. That Television chorus to me like sounds more like the Wild Hearts, you know, kind of vibe. See, that one works. So I don't mind some of it, and it can be like fairly close to what it is now. There's just a little bit more variety. Maybe the way some of the songs start too, like just felt like, man, it's another song like this, and then the vocal starts like, oh yeah, this one's different. But like the beginning part, I'm disengaging, I think, because I'm like, oh, this is gonna be the same thing again.
Yeah. You know, like, did you mention Slumber? Like that's one that it takes some interesting turns. I think the thing that I was missing is, you know, Brett Gurewitz is here, playing guitar. Greg Graffin is the lead vocalist. Jay Bentley, who's been with the band the whole time, is on bass and singing backup. But I don't know what's going on the bass. A lot of these songs, like they're just locked into whatever the guitar parts are. I would have liked a few times when you get to a chorus, or not when you get to chorus, when you get to a verse, it doesn't have to be the same one every time, but like drop the guitars out for a sec and just let the bass carry a verse. I know that's a very 90s thing to do, the soft, loud part, but just give the bass a moment of its own. And because it really doesn't happen on this record. That was one of the missing.
I'm with you. It's one of the you hear it a little bit in Infected, I think, because the verses open up a bit.
Yes.
It's one of the downsides of this style production too. They're using a lot of compression.
Mm-hmm.
You're always at a max volume feel, so when you combine that with these relentless drums, and it feels like the band's always at 11 intensity, it's a lot. And then you got very dense, oftentimes lyrically it's very dense. It can be quite a bit to take in. But I think, foreshadowing here what my rating's gonna be. The reason it's working is because these songs are pretty short, man.
Mm-hmm.
They're in and out a lot of under 2 minutes, 2:30, 3 minutes. They're in and out of the song. So very forgiving if you can get to be that efficient with what you're trying to get across. I think Infected is the only song here that gets out over 4 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
And that's probably just because the tempo's a little less.
Right. Now I mentioned that this is the same year of Dookie and Smash. Both of those were multi-million selling albums. This went gold, which means it sold about 500,000 copies. And it apparently, according to the band, it still like sells for them. So it still moves copies every year.
Yeah.
Which makes sense. I mean, this is a good sounding record. It's got really good songs. Probably their most, in terms of radio friendly song, 21st Century Digital Boy. Because there was a video for that. Who was the director? It was like a movie director who did it. Gore Verbinski was the director who directed Pirates of the Caribbean. And what else did he do? The Lone Ranger. He did three Pirates of the Caribbean movies. And so the fact that it didn't reach the same heights as Dookie and Smash, I think it makes sense. It's not, there's no long view, there's no basket case, there's no self-esteem. There's not a song that's like you're going to put in the the playlist at the bar in 1994 and all the college kids are going to sing along with. This is a little headier than that. This is still going to appeal to like the punk rockers more so than like the people who are listening to more mainstream music.
A little more college, right? I that's another way to think about it. Like, I think this is a band it's going to resonate a lot more if you're in the 18 to 24 range than it is the 12 to 18 range. Whereas I think Offspring and Green Day are going to be much more relevant to that audience.
Now, it is funny because regarding that 21st Century Digital Boy song, you would think it's like a criticism of, technology and people being addicted to their technology. This is long before cell phones.
Right.
So Greg Graffin, who is a bit of a nerd, was interviewed by Scientific America in 2010. And they asked him, your most famous song is this one, which pokes fun at our gadget-laden era. And he said, oh, no, we love technology and gadgets. We use irony in 60% of our music. 21st Century Digital Boy is an ironic twist characterizing the youth of today. The truth is that even though the song was written in 1990, it was clear that youth were going to be affected for good and bad by digital technology. It's probably because we loved video games so much. Interesting.
Crazy,
I
man.
didn't really expect for 60% of the songs to be irony.
Yeah.
Like I'm sort of taking everything at face value that's very earnest, but they're being ironic in some of these songs. So I'm like, okay, well that's actually good. They're not so angry that there's actually a bit of like humor to this.
Yeah, I mean, that came across to me. Like they felt anthemic at times and protesty, or obviously like sharing a very specific point of view, but there was also like didn't feel preachy or
right.
It kind of blows my mind that somebody wrote this song in 1990.
Yeah.
I mean, what technology did we have? CD players?
We had cable TV.
I mean, I guess video games. I guess
video
Nintendo,
games.
The NES.
Well, we had the little football game that you held in your hand and the little dots moved around. I mean, I got addicted to that for sure. I was playing on the bus every day to school. Those were awesome. Just think about that. It's just a little box and you just moved a dot. And that's how you scored touchdowns. Imagine explaining that to some kid who's like got a VR setup and he's doing like,
right.
Oh my God. We're old. So let's get into our overall ratings on this record. Worthy album, better EP, or decent single for Stranger Than Fiction by Bad Religion. Jay, where do you land?
I landed in a worthy album. It's a rocker, man. It's kind of funny. This is, I think, labeled as hard rock in Apple Music now. It's not even really categorized as punk, and that's what resonated with me at the time I heard it, in 94, and I kind of wish I would have taken my whatever I was doing at the time, mowing lawns or minimum wage or whatever, and spent a little bit actually picking the record up, because I probably would have liked it a lot at the time too, but I'm glad I finally got around to it. And yeah, I think it's a worthy album. It's a band that's just not only distinct but also pretty successful in this genre.
I agree. It's a worthy album. I feel like whatever backlash it got at the time is fairly undeserved. You could maybe say the production is too, like you said, it's loud, it's compressed. But I don't think it affected their songwriting or their approach. But this does skirt the line, as you mentioned, between like punk rock and then just straight up hard rock. It's as far away from like hardcore as I can imagine. Which I guess when they started out, they were probably considered hardcore punk, but I don't know, because it was 80. And, I think when I think of punk in 1980, it's not this necessarily. It's a much, I don't know, different sound. It's more of a, you're thinking of like the Clash and stuff like that, which is much more expansive. But yeah, I just looked on Wikipedia. The first album is described is listed in the genre of hardcore punk, as opposed to just punk or skate punk or all the other punks that there are. And that's two worthy albums for Stranger Than Fiction by Bad Religion.
The deluxe edition on streaming has 3 additional tracks too, by the way. Obviously from the sessions, they sound exactly like the record, produced like the record. They're not maybe they were B-sides. They're not like demos or throwaway tracks. They're pretty solid.
Got it. Yeah, up until Recipe for Hate, they were listed as hardcore punk, and then it switches to melodic hardcore.
Okay. I mean, okay.
We're getting real drilling down specific. So if you don't have any melody, you're just hardcore. But if you add melody, you're melodic hardcore.
Right.
Got it. All right. Well, we need to thank all of our patrons for voting in this. We need to thank Eric Peterson for suggesting it. If you would like to be like Eric, you can go to digmeoutpodcast.com. You can suggest an album at that website via our submit an album form, put in the album title, the album artist, and leave us a little note, and it'll end up in the hopper for a future poll. And you can vote in those polls by joining us at dmounion.com or digmeoutunion.com. We have polls for the tournaments. We have polls for when our albums are up for review that our patrons select. We have polls for our aughts episodes, which are exclusive to our Patreon community, 6 a year, plus a back catalog of like 24 80s exclusive episodes that we did over the last couple of years. And just by joining us at Patreon and becoming a part of the union, it's also where you can join our Discord, where we talk about all kinds of stuff. There was a lot of Mariah Carey talk this week. And one of our patrons has a haunted bathroom, and we've been talking about that. Have you seen those pictures, Jay?
I haven't. I need to go.
You need to go. You need to go and go into the scientific. We have a scientific section.
Who is this?
Our friend Richard Waterman. If you go in there, you'll see he has a poltergeist. He has a poltergeist in his bathroom, or it's like a time bandit situation. I'm not sure. Perhaps some sort of like alternate dimension, like maybe there's a haunted bathtub. I'm not sure, but it looks like a volcano is in his bathtub lighting up, and it's terrifying, and we have no idea. It's an interior room. There's no exterior light hitting this room.
Yeah.
So where is this light coming from that's causing his bathtub to light up?
Maybe it was the same light that was lighting me at the start of this episode. Just sort of surrounding me from I don't know where,
enveloping you, lifting you up to the you're being raptured, Jay. That's what's happening. If you join Patreon, you can also read the box newsletter, which you can sign up for. That's our Substack newsletter. Comes out every week with a release calendar of new releases relevant to 80s, 90s, and aughts music. That includes new music, new books. We just announced today our previous guest, Bill Janovitz, who has written a couple of music-related books, is going to be doing a book on the Cars with the help of Elliot Easton and some other folks. So I'm really looking forward to that, because that's a band that like I didn't realize it until he said he was doing the book. I was like, yeah, I actually want to read that book. There's a lot I want to know about that band that I don't really know, because that was pre, everybody being on the internet and sharing everything that they do all the time. So be interested to read about the Cars in 2025 or whenever that book comes out.
You got it wrong. It was Hal that has the lava bathtub.
Are you sure? I thought it was Richard. Okay.
I'm looking at it right now.
Okay. Sorry. And our newsletter comes out, like I mentioned, every week, plus 2 reviews of new releases, 1-minute reviews every week. Finally, Apple Podcasts is where you go to leave positive feedback for the podcast. For Jay, I'm Tim. We're out, and we'll be back next week with another episode of Dig Me Out.